welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I'm going to be giving you 10 things that I wish I knew before moving to Singapore based on my own personal experiences of having lived here for over a year as an expat. Hopefully, these 10 things will be able to help you make some decisions and help you prepare for your move to Singapore, or if you're just wanting to travel here. So here we go, 10 things I wish I knew before moving to Singapore. Number 1. The number of parks there are in Singapore. So this is something that I didn't know before moving here. I have traveled to Singapore before, and I do know that they have a lot of trees on the streets. When you're driving along the streets, it's very green, basically. But I didn't know about the parks that they've built here. Basically, their strategy is that within a 5 to 10 minute walk from every residential area, you should be able to enter a park. Whichever apartment you're choosing to live in, you can be sure that there'll be a park nearby and you can always go for a stroll. Number 2 is the rain and humidity. I obviously knew there was going to be a lot of rain in Singapore. I have read online that Singapore is basically called a rain sponge, but I had no idea about how much it really would affect kind of your day-to-day life. It doesn't rain at a specific time, so you really can't predict. It's just gonna rain whenever it's gonna rain, and it will rain consecutively for an entire week, and then it will have like a period of 2 to 3 days when it doesn't rain at all, and then the process would begin again. So I didn't know about the rhythm of the rain here, and I guess that's what I mean. And it's really difficult to kind of plan outdoor activities because I like to do outdoor activities. I like to go to the parks, I like to take a walk, go for hikes and things. And it's just really difficult to plan that when you're living in an area with unpredictable rain. So if you're moving here, make sure that you've got an umbrella with you and shoes. Make sure that you're not always wearing really expensive shoes to go out, or just make sure to have like a slipper in your bag whenever you go out so that you could be ready to change into them when it starts raining out of the blue. Number 3. Now this is kind of something that is not going to be written on the internet, so you're not really going to know about this unless you know somebody who actually lives in Singapore, like me. So this is about the kind of casual racism that goes on in Singapore. Definition for casual racism: to innocently stereotype certain groups of people in an obvious manner in front of their face, and they don't take it very seriously. This happens very often between Singaporeans themselves and Singaporeans and foreigners who are not necessarily Westerners. I'm not sure if there's any kind of casual racism going on with Westerners, but with other Asians like me, I've experienced casual racism several times, but I'm kind of like, all right, yeah. But I don't really necessarily want to go through the details of how casual racism had happened to me on the internet necessarily, but if you'd like to know, feel free to message me on Instagram or something. I'd be happy to tell you about it. So what I mean by like Singaporeans having cageisms against one another is kind of like between the different ethnic groups, Chinese, Indians, and Malays. Number 4 is the number of HDBs in Singapore. So HDBs are basically government built housing development areas. They are usually basically really huge apartment complexes. Within the complex, you'd find shops, restaurants, and other things that like people who live in these apartments can do together as a community. So this is like a very big thing here in Singapore, and most of the HDBs are like really big apartment units where you could rent a room and then share a common living room with other people and live together with other people, and they're really cheap. Yeah, this is like really common in Singapore. You could basically see it everywhere, and I didn't know that I would be seeing so many HDBs before moving to Singapore. Like if we're just kind of driving down the street, walking down the street, on your right you see an HDB, on your left you see an HDB. The thing about HDBs is that when you're first coming to Singapore, you might get the impression that it's like for people who don't make a lot of money, but that's really not the case. There are a lot of HDBs in Singapore that the entire unit is bought by one particular person, and basically very luxurious, actually. Number 5 is probably the thing that people traveling to Singapore worry about the most, or living in Singapore, actually coming to live in Singapore actually worry about the most. And that is the cost of living and the expenses. Singapore is one of the, or maybe the most expensive place for expats to live in. And part of that is true, and part of that is not true. The part that is true is in terms of accommodations. I really think that Singapore, compared to other countries in Southeast Asia or even in Asia, to rent an apartment here is really, really pricey. If you're working in Singapore, you really have to think about how much your salary is and how much your apartment costs. As a general rule of thumb, I think that the amount that you're paying for your accommodations should not cost more than, I think it's 20% of your total salary. Then you're gonna be kind of short on money or not be able to save because you've got a lot of other things that you need to pay for, like other bills, and you've got like food and transportation, internet, Wi-Fi, your phone bills, and that kind of thing that you need to pay for. And there are costs of other things that is really cheap in Singapore, like food can be really cheap if you go to supermarkets, but there are different kinds of supermarkets. You gotta choose a very cheap one. The one that I would recommend is Giant. Giant supermarket is really cheap. If you try to go to cold storage or just other kinds of supermarkets, the price especially of vegetables, you will see a very big difference. In terms of transportation, Singapore is also really cheap. If you're not planning to Uber everywhere or if you're planning to take a taxi everywhere, the bus, the MRT goes everywhere. The MRT costs you a minimum of $1 to $2. The bus, a minimum of 77 cents. If you're just going like 3 bus stops, it will probably cost 77 cents. Before moving here, I thought that I would be taking the MRT or the subway everywhere, but as it turns out, the bus here is actually more convenient than the train, the MRT, and it does get you to more locations than the MRT, so that's one thing to keep in mind. If you're planning to eat out in Singapore, it does get pretty pricey. Casual meal in a restaurant, let's say, for one person might cost you about $20, 20 Singaporean dollars. But you could always go to places like hawker stalls, which are basically outdoor food courts. Food there would cost at about $3, 3 Singaporean dollars. So that's one option. However, I don't recommend always eating at a hawker stall because repetitive selection of dishes. And it's really not that healthy for you because it's really greasy. Number 6 is the availability of vegan food here, because I'm vegan, so I was kind of like, I didn't know. However, after downloading, the very famous vegan app, Happy Cow, there's like vegan restaurants everywhere in Singapore, and that's only the vegan ones. That's not including the vegetarian restaurants and the restaurants with vegan options. So just the vegan restaurants in itself is basically everywhere. And you've got a range of like Chinese vegan restaurants, Western food, burgers, oh my god, Vegan Burg and Nom Vom. Got 2 burger places, sushi places. They don't, however, have a vegan pizza. Number 7, this is kind of a funny one. This is kind of about Singaporean people. In my job, I've had to encounter a lot of Singaporeans. And, you can really tell the kind of influence that the British have here on Singapore in terms of for example, the kind of English that they like to use. They try to incorporate British vocabulary into their everyday vocabulary after, the British colonized Singapore. And leading on from that, I feel that Singaporeans have a certain view of Westerners in general. And this is not like it's a positive or a negative thing. This is just like what I've noticed is that there's a certain appreciation of the Western culture and the Western way of life. If you kind of were a kind of person that grew up in Europe or something, they would be like, oh really, wow, did you really grow up there? Like, you're kind of getting the picture. Number 8 is that Singaporeans are very smart people and very sophisticated as well. And they have a way of thinking that they're very, very focused on critical thinking. I think they kind of grew up that way. children are taught in schools to think critically ever since they were very young, so they kind of grew up thinking in that critical kind of a way. Alright, number 9 is the level of noise pollution that you actually get here in Singapore. Because it's such a small city, there are construction sites going on everywhere. There's a very high chance that you're going to be in a place where there's a construction going on. If you actually happen to be home during the daytime on like a weekday, like me, sometimes I'm home on the weekday during the daytime, I find that I don't know if you can hear it. It's actually going on outside right now. I can hear just basically trucks and there's really no like insulation to like outside noises or anything like that. Number 10 is kind of the size of Singapore. I mean, it's a really small country / city. Before moving to Singapore, I was actually kind of thinking that, all right, I like to travel anyways. I'll be traveling abroad and that kind of thing. So I won't really be in the country, so I don't need to do much. But it's kind of like the flights from Singapore to other countries is really also not that cheap. Even with local airlines like Silk Airways and Tiger Airways, the flights are really not that cheap. Even if you're just going to Thailand or Indonesia, yeah. Those are the 10 things that I wish I knew before moving to Singapore. I hope that, it would help you to kind of make some decisions when moving to Singapore, or if you're just traveling to Singapore, some of those might apply and be useful for you. If you like this video, please feel free to subscribe to my channel so that you can join me on more of my travel adventures and just have fun together. Please give it a thumbs up. If you have any questions, leave it in the comments below. And that's all for today. I'll see you soon. Bye!